Well, we have another very exciting panel discussion lined up now. It's talking about data, the power of the world's most valuable resource. We've often heard it's said that data is the new oil, and today we'll find out why. So I have a stellar set of experts here on the panel. We have Mr. Dharmender Kapoor. He's the CEO and MD at Birlasoft. We have Mr. Sridhar Pinnapureddy, the founder and chairman of CtrlS, and Mr. Venugopal S. Arcot, the Senior Director, Solution Consulting at ServiceNow. Thank you, gentlemen. Now, let's quickly start the conversation. Sridhar, I'm coming to you first. As our topic says that data is the world's most valuable resource, if that is true, then you're very much the vault keeper. The demand for cloud space has skyrocketed during the lockdown. So how are you innovating to ensure companies can make the most of this data?
Well, you're right that data is exploding. I'll give you a simple statistic. There is an estimated 1.7 MB of data being generated by every person for every second on this planet Earth right now, which was not even 5% of this 10 years ago. I'll give you another statistic. At CtrlS, it took us about 10 years to build a 30 megawatt capacity of data centers. And in the last 18 months or 24 months, we have crossed 100 megawatt capacity, and we are now planning another 600 megawatt worth of capacity. And we are running short, we are running late on almost all projects. So now this is exactly what is happening, not just because of COVID. COVID has accelerated the people towards the cloud. Absolutely.
That is kind of like, in a way, so to say, people call it the pivot of the industry. Mr. Kapoor, now I'll come to you. Just taking this one step ahead. So great data is the world's most powerful resource, most valuable resource. The vault keepers are doing more and more to ensure that there's proper space for the data. But data is not valuable just because it's data. It's valuable because what a company does with that data. That's what makes the difference. And how are you seeing Indian companies evolve in their processing, analyzing, and usage of this data of theirs?
So I think, Sumiit, you are absolutely right. It is what we do with the data is far more important than the data itself. As I used to always say that the data everywhere, not an insight to make me blink. Okay. I think if the data insight is making you blink and making you think, I think that is what is much more valuable. So the companies are really scaling up the usage of the data, be it the customer experience, be it employee productivity or business growth. I think the data is being used very, very effectively in all these manners. Even if you look at during the COVID situation, a lot of time the data analytics was being used to tackle business challenges, be it looking at the breaks in the supply chain, or looking at the attrition levels that may happen in the industry, or the churn in the orders that may happen. All was actually being done based on the data. So slowly what is happening is that as the world has grown from ERP to digital, more and more companies are growing from being process-driven organization to insight-driven organization. And it can only happen when we have the data and we are able to bring insight on top of the data to take the business decisions.
I think that's very well put, Mr. Kapoor. We're moving to an insight-driven organization. That's a very valid point. I'll just take this ahead to Mr. Arcot. So many companies are working from home. I mean, almost everybody is some form of working from home. How has ServiceNow seen the workflows change? How have you seen these pivots happen? What are some trends that you are seeing that are changing the way companies are working now?
Thanks, Sumiit, and Sridhar pointed out the importance of data, and Dharmender put it in terms of the workflows involved. So ServiceNow is in this business of connecting these workflows, and whether it is an employee experience or a customer experience, the work has to flow, and within the work is what data flows. In a typically work from home atmosphere that we are, and trying to move towards an hybrid, and that will continue probably, is in terms of how do we ensure that the risk and compliance associated with the employees while onboarding to offboarding, as well as our customer that we are engaging with and their engagement experiences or retain is super important for all of the companies. So in doing so, there is a process involved in terms of providing this work environment for the employees on one end, and when they return to work, how do we ensure that the safety and the space in our culture is very sacred and it continues to be sacred? How do we ensure that that space is maintained when they return to office as well? And emergency is inevitable. We have to be prepared for those emergencies. So return to workplace also provides this opportunity to provide the willingness of the employees, as well as providing the necessary space, as well as providing the work culture so that the work can happen. And in an emergency situation, appropriate protocols are followed to maintain that. At the end of the day, we make the work better for people.
Absolutely, because I think that is the most important point, sir. The fact about this emergency protocols, because we've seen it happen and we've seen the second wave also catching people by surprise. And I mean, it's just the new normal is to have some kind of business continuity plan. And it's obviously most important to ensure that your data is not lost anywhere and that the analysis, the insights, like Mr. Kapoor said, that keeps going on. Mr. Sridhar, coming to you, obviously the tech space has seen, the tech space is kind of the word meaning innovation. They are both the same almost now. But how are you seeing some new innovations that will help Indian companies and also Indians make the most of the data on hand? This analysis, these insights. How are you?
What I have seen, I get your, I interact with hundreds of CIOs. What I've seen the most successful ones are doing is take their company, first on their agenda is take their company digital.
Right.
Look at how the Swiggies of the world have transformed. Ubers, Olas have transformed the whole ecosystem, business ecosystem. Now, that's what all the organizations are trying to do, is replace every touch point, every process, as many processes as possible, enable them digitally. Number two, what they're doing is analytics. They're saying, all of these processes or technology is generating so much data. How can I, put it to more use through analytics? They're saying number of, success stories since we are on a media thing, interesting Netflix story. Needless to say that House of Cards was the key to success of Netflix. And it is a product of analytics. It is not a product of creation. It is a product of based on analytics, based on how the users of an older show of similar House of Cards, the British House of Cards and Kevin Spacey, and then they brought those three people together, and then boom, what happened, right? It's a product of analytics in a creative business as well. So that's the second thing that the companies are trying to utilize, and that's where from a CtrlS perspective also, we have started 3 new subsidiaries for digital technologies for ensuring that their proper process mining. We did a startup of process mining. We acquired a robotic process automation company to help the customers grow in the digital transformation.
Fantastic. Mr. Kapoor, I'll come to you next. So now, obviously, data is the most critical aspect, but how can enterprises look at securing data? That is the most important thing, especially since the nature of work has changed. People are collaborating more than ever from different locations. And if you look towards the US, there have been a number of these ransomware attacks that have been happening and crippling major institutions there. Just your thoughts on this key part of securing the data.
Absolutely. I think the data, as you know, is being considered as an asset these days rather than just a transaction. So it becomes very, very important that how do we protect the data, be it through the ransomware from the ransomware or from any other theft that may happen
Mhm.
within the organization. So if you look at the Personal Data Protection Bill, it is an important step in India's reckoning with the looming crisis of data privacy.
Yeah.
I think while the bill is ambitious in its scope, it will create an infrastructure in which individual rights in personal data can be exercised, grievances can be addressed, and offenders can be penalized. I think this is a very, very important step in the data privatization and the data protection. With the rise of data monetization, it will become even more important because now your growth and your revenue, everything will get connected with the data. So incorporating the privacy and the privacy preserving analytics would become far more important. So in future, in my opinion, the organization will have to be more deliberate in their interactions to make sure all their data's competing interests are satisfied while ensuring ROI.
Absolutely, that is a key point there, and it's a great trend, changing trend that we are seeing. I will come to Sridhar and Mr. Kapoor on more of this part, but before that, I just want to bring in Mr. Arcot because sir, we've heard you refer to operational resilience and embedded risks often. Can you just reflect on these expressions since we are talking about security and the risk involved in ensuring the data is kept safe and sacrosanct?
Yeah, it's a very important aspect of it, and I refer to that much in terms of embedded risk, whether it's Sridhar's business in terms of managing customer data, and similar to that, what we do in managing customer data as well. And DK mentioned about security of data monetization. We are responsible for customers' data. And in this context, in whatever workflow it is involved, there is risk, some amount of risk involved. Like whether it's a third-party risk or within the organization risk. To understand that there exists and we take measures for that is important. It is like a metaphor of wearing a mask, right? There is risk somewhere around us, but we're wearing a mask. But to know that and have preventative measures is very important. So the embeddation of risk is all about whether it's an IT workflow, and that's where the resilience comes. It's about bouncing back quickly, finding out RCA or predicting things better, because the risk can happen anywhere. It could be happening, as Sridhar was mentioning, in the supply chain process, in terms of the CPQ process, or in terms of managing some other business process or onboarding background checks. The flaw, the fissures can be anywhere. But to have a look in terms of where it is and ensure that that is protected is important. So these policies of different nature, law of the land, need to be protected. So as and when the work happens, risk monitoring should be embedded part of it, so that when that event happens, it should leave a trigger, or when it is about to happen, there must be a trigger in terms of allowing that to happen. So when that risk embeddedization happens at that point of a time, then we focus on the resilience part of it in terms of bouncing back or preventing and predicting part of it. And that's where it's a combination of both in terms of operational resilience with embedded risk, allow business to work smoother.
Absolutely, because we keep, like you just said, the risk will be there. It's just about what are the steps that we can take to mitigate that risk, to ensure that we're not handicapped by that. Mr. Sridhar, coming to you on what Mr. Kapoor was earlier talking about, this is about, over the years, there's been so much talk about data privacy in India and how Indians should be able to make the best of their own data. So what's the way ahead? What do you foresee for the way ahead in this space?
India is progressing very well digitally. There are about 448 billion social media users.
Wow.
There are about 548 million people buying online today in India. And even more internet users, around 620 million something, astronomical numbers. And they're keeping everything about themselves, their private lives, their, everything. Pictures to conversations with their loved ones, to business transactions, to their passwords, to bank accounts, everything is online. If there is anything important for our society today, more than the the law and order as we see it. He is making sure that the data is secure. The government has realized it, of course. I mean, they came up with a number of measures, including introducing a bill in the parliament. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to learn from. There's almost 60 to 70% of the global countries have already implemented these. There's a lot to learn from, especially the European laws have been quite validated. Australian IRAP regulations also are there to learn from and implement in India.
Exactly. That is what is the most concerning and the one that needs the most attention, I feel. And it's good that things are progressing on that front. Mr. Kapoor, coming back to you again with the question that I asked you earlier. So it's about how you analyze this data. That is what makes the difference. And like Mr. Sridhar was saying, the Swiggies, the Ubers, the Olas, the Netflixes, they're analyzing data differently. So if we are talking to an audience out there, some are experts in this, some might be laymen. So if I come to you from a very layman perspective to say that, okay, I have a business and I'm getting data, I'm hearing from my customers. What's my next step? How do I ensure that I can make the most of this data and realize that, okay, my ex Mr. Customer or Miss Y needs this kind of product, that because we hear so much artificial intelligence, machine learning, big data. How do we simplify this for a startup or someone who is just new to this?
No, absolutely. I think the way every organization has to look at is that when the data is there, one is the data that you have within your organization that you produce, but then you have to look at the interdependencies that might be there with your clients or with your end consumer or customers, or the data dependencies that you may have with your suppliers and your partners.
Right.
Okay. So how do you not look at the business process alone, but look at the entire business value chain? Okay. We have been putting a lot of focus in Birlasoft to start putting the focus on the business value chain and not just restrict ourselves into the business process within the organization. Because if digital is keeping the boundaries on in the organization, then the company has failed with the digital. The digital should be able to break the boundaries and say that I am able to connect with my consumer, with my client, with my supplier, with my partner, able to share the data, able to democratize the data, and able to generate the insight that will make me become more efficient. That is the way we have to look at, for example, the blockchain when it comes to. Okay. Now the blockchain has started with that whole thought process of decentralizing the data. But that does not mean that we become very easy with the data and we can let the data flow everywhere. It still has to be governed very well. Okay. Similarly, fully autonomous vehicles. Yes, it uses so much of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and everything, and it is all based on the data. But that also means that if the data governance is not done well, somebody can hack my vehicle while I am going somewhere. Okay. So how do we bring that responsibility into the play, but also look at beyond the boundaries, because more and more data that can be interconnected with the data that is outside my boundaries, I will be able to find much bigger usage of that and will also be able to innovate.
That's very well put, Mr. Kapoor. That's given a great context to the whole topic. Mr. Arcot, during these times, we've seen the importance of working as a connected enterprise. So for efficiency and automation also. Can you reflect on your experience on the need for a connected enterprise in your interactions with your team members, with your customers, with the entire ecosystem?
So that's an interesting question, because DK just mentioned about business value chain, and that's all about it. In terms of every organization or enterprise is a collection of departments, sales, marketing, and HR, and so other departments. Each of the departments use their own systems of records to function, but they are siloed. But life cycles happens through connected systems. If I'm getting onboarded, I have to touch an HR system. I have to touch a background check, which is outside the system. I have to go to the facilities, the admin, and so many other functions. And same is the case when a customer complaint workflow happens, that somebody complains, and it could be an IT issue or it could be a transaction issue, but being able to converse and give that comfort and trust to the customer is supremely important. Connected enterprise is making those connections happen, and as Sridhar was pointing out in terms of making contactless, in terms of contact to contactless. This also reflects onto the ESG, which we call about environment, social and governance part of it, in terms of being responsible in what you're doing and getting carbon credits out of that. Last but not the least, enterprise is not within one organization alone. Connecting with our partners, customers makes it multiple enterprises together. And it also secures the boundary that DK was mentioning, that do we have a secure boundary within our partner ecosystem that we can freely work together for a business outcome, which is valuable for all of us.
Right, that's so well put. I would have loved for this conversation to just go on and on, but we're running out of time. So I'll just come to all the panelists quickly for a closing comment. Mr. Sridhar, it's in the technology space, it's futile to ask, what do you envision the future as? Because let's be honest, technology changes things every day, every second, every minute, forget every year. But I'm still going to ask you to give me some kind of projection. I don't know if you want to pick your timeline. Do you want to say 1 year, 2 year? How do you see things changing in the data space in your sector, maybe in the next year?
Quite dramatic changes are happening, I would say. Both in terms of the volume, as well as in terms of the challenges and opportunities it is presenting.
Yeah.
Especially, for those of who are in the startup communities, they are the ones who could capitalize on this the most, because they're nimble, they're easy to learn, and capitalize on that. Hundreds of new opportunities coming up.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. Mr. Kapoor, same question to you. The way ahead, how do you see things changing in the ecosystem, in what Birlasoft will be doing for the way ahead?
No, I think we absolutely see that the data lakes are changing into the data oceans because the data is everywhere. And in my opinion, everybody has to be far more careful with the data than with the process. If you look at in the 90s and the 2000s, the focus was a lot on the process side.
Yeah.
But the focus is more on the data now, for simple reason that the process can be rewritten, but the data once lost is completely gone. The history is gone and your experience is gone. And data is not only about the transaction that you are dealing with. The data is also about the experience of working through the process. Now, whether you capture that or not really depends on the maturity of the company, maturity of the organization, because you might be capturing the transaction, but not the experience of dealing with the transaction. I think that data about the data is becoming far, far more important, because that is where the next level of efficiency is needed. And the organizations need to reach to that level of maturity that they start getting the experiential data also captured and they can start using it for better insights.
Fantastic. And Mr. Arcot, coming to you, sir, for your closing comments, same question, the way ahead, how do you envision the future?
When we talk to all the leaders, 3 imperatives: speed, experience, intelligence. It can translate into many different dimensions, but it requires companies to rewire their DNA and undergo a cultural shift in paradigm to be more flexible, adaptable, and agile in today's digital age.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, panelists, for that. And to our viewers, the closing comments, the takeaways are that, well, the future is going to be changing dramatically. We need to focus more on data, not just the processes, but the core data. And, well, there will be a lot of speed, experience, and intelligence that will make a mark there. Thank you so much, Mr. Sridhar. Thank you, Mr. Kapoor. And thank you, Mr. Arcot, for being here with us. And viewers, I'm sure you've enjoyed this panel as well. But stay tuned. We've got many more interesting sessions coming up here at India Leaders Conclave. Thank you so much for being with us here today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.